Think about the most dangerous sentence you can say to a human being. It's probably not "you are wrong," it's "there's nothing you can do about it." Because throughout human history, whenever people have been told to simply accept their situation, someone has eventually stood up and said, no. And that's why, not because we love chaos, but because somewhere inside us there is this ridiculously annoying little voice that keeps saying, but why? Why do they get to decide? Why do we have to accept this? And why is this fair? And most importantly, why should I stay quiet? And honestly, pop culture has been obsessed with this idea forever. Take Star Wars for example. The entire galaxy is basically having a very long argument about whether you should obey the Empire. And the Empire's answer is pretty simple: obey us or suffer. But the rebels don't just fight because they are superheroes. Most of them are ordinary people who eventually realize that the system they are living under is wrong. And that's what makes Andor especially interesting, because it doesn't show rebellion as this cool little adventure where everyone wears matching jackets and give inspirational speeches. It shows how rebellion actually begins with fear, with anger, with people slowly becoming tired of being afraid, and eventually someone decides that they've had enough. Even the famous prison storyline in Andor is basically built around this idea. People who have been conditioned to believe they have no power suddenly realize that they can act together. Scholars have even analyzed the show's rebellion speeches as examples of how resistance challenges the dominant narrative of an authoritarian system. And that's the interesting thing about protest. One person complaining is easy to ignore. 100 people shouting is harder. But 1,000 people marching? Now you have a problem. Because protest isn't just about making noise. It's about making power uncomfortable. And you see the same thing in Dune. Arrakis is not just a desert planet where people ride giant worms because apparently Hollywood decided that wasn't weird enough. It's a story about exploitation. A powerful outside force controls the resource, controls the land, controls the people, and the people who live there eventually resist. The Fremen don't simply wake up one morning and decide, you know what would be fun? A revolution. No, resistance grows from years of being controlled, exploited, and ignored. And that's something fiction keeps getting right. The Hunger Games, V for Vendetta, The Matrix, Avatar, even Harry Potter. Different stories, different worlds, different villains, but underneath all of them is basically the same human question. How long are you willing to accept a system you believe is wrong? And now look around India, because you don't need a galaxy far away to find people asking the same question. In recent months, thousands of young Indians have taken to the streets over examination irregularities, recruitment controversies, and unemployment. In Jharkhand, students and job aspirants have protested alleged irregularities in recruitment examination, with demonstrations escalating to clashes involving police water cannons, tear gas, and batons. And this isn't just about one examination, because when you spend years studying, pay for coaching, sacrifice your time, and then believe the system deciding your future isn't functioning fairly, the anger is not really surprising. You're not just protesting a paper, you're protesting the feeling that your future is being decided by something you cannot control. And that's where protest becomes much bigger than politics, because we often imagine protesters as people who are angry about one specific thing, but sometimes they are angry because they have been ignored for too long. And that's why some of the recent youth movements in India have been particularly interesting. Social media has changed what protest looks like. A protest no longer needs one charismatic leader standing on a stage. It can simply start with a meme, a hashtag, a video game, a video, a ridiculous nickname, and suddenly thousands of people who have never met each other are talking about the same problem. The recent youth-led Cockroach Janta Party movement is a fascinating example of this newer form of activism, a largely digital-first, leaderless movement that grew around anger over exam issues and wider concerns about unemployment and governance. And whether you agree with every slogan or every demand isn't really the point. The interesting part is that people discovered that they could collectively make themselves impossible to ignore. And that's basically what protest has always been. The technology may change, the clothes may change, the slogans may change, but the psychology will remain the same, because humans are social animals and we are incredibly sensitive to unfairness. Imagine you're standing in a queue, you've been waiting for an hour, and suddenly someone walks in front of you. You immediately think, "Excuse me?" Congratulations, you have just experienced the smallest possible version of political consciousness, because protest begins with a very simple belief: this isn't fair. Sometimes that belief is wrong. Protests become violent, movements are manipulated, and sometimes people protest for completely opposite reasons. And that's important too, because protest isn't automatically moral just because it's a protest. A crowd can demand justice. A crowd can also demand something terrible. Human beings are complicated like that, but the existence of protest tells us something incredibly important about ourselves. We don't just adapt to the world, we argue with it. We imagine a better version of it, and sometimes we try to force reality to catch up with our imagination. And that's why every generation eventually has its own rebellion. Older generations had their movements. Our generation has hashtags, live streams, memes, protest songs, and smartphones. But the fundamental emotion has not changed. It's still, "I don't accept this." And maybe that's why stories about rebellion never really disappear. Because when Luke Skywalker looks at the Empire, when Paul Atreides looks at the forces occupying Arrakis, and when Katniss Everdeen raises her 3 fingers, we don't just see fictional characters. We see a fantasy that humans have been carrying for thousands of years. The fantasy that ordinary people can stand up to something much bigger than themselves, that one voice can become 1,000, that a symbol can become a movement, that fear can eventually turn into courage, and that even the most powerful system in the world is still made of people. People who can be challenged, people who can disagree, people who can say no. So maybe humans weren't born to protest. Maybe that's too romantic. Maybe humans were simply born with something much more dangerous: the ability to imagine that things could be different. Because the moment you imagine a world that's better than the one you're living in, the current world starts looking a little harder to tolerate. And that's when the question begins. Not why are they protesting, but what happened that made them feel they had to. Because every protest has a story before the crowd arrives. A student who studied for years, a worker who feels unheard, a citizen who feels ignored, a community that feels threatened, a person who finally decides that staying silent is more painful than speaking. And maybe that's why we keep protesting. Not because humans hate peace, but because sometimes peace without justice just looks like silence. And humans have never been very good at staying silent. And maybe we were born to protest. That's it for today. See you next time. Until then, may the cinema be with you.